When will we learn? The storming of the US Capitol has shown humanity one thing: our inherent inability to learn from history and our constant recourse to our default way of thinking, to see problems through the lens of tribe. About this time 4 years ago, there were about 100,000 people on the street of Washington protesting against Trump with posters like, "He's not my president." I think we all remember this. Followed by women's marches in their millions. Well, across America, across the world, in fact, actually. Please tell me what is different today. 4 years ago, I used historical arguments to show how we on the left causally contributed to the election of Donald Trump, showing that when our side wins, we should see it as a part of a political cycle rather than a feature of progress. And if we see it as a cycle, we will be wiser in our words, our actions, our overall behavior. For example, the anti-armament protests against Ronald Reagan in the 1980s seemed to have effect when peace-loving Democrats finally pushed our leader to victory, Bill Clinton. The world seemed a better place, led by, a nicer guy for one, with higher values, more importantly. Surely this triumph of our virtues was irreversible, and finally we would set ourselves on a steady path to progress. But we were wrong. The right reacted, and in came George W. Bush for 2 terms, who at the time seemed to be the symbol of violence and division, regression, and hope seemed a little lost. We could not wait to have a chance to set things right again. And, for progress and peace to be restored. Eventually, we found it. And in what a man. President Obama, who was basically the fairy tale president. He was good, he was honorable, he was likable, the first black president. We used his election to show our political rivals that at last, if someone like him could become president, then surely we had won the larger battle. Things surely would never go backwards after that. However, in persisting in this way of thinking, we pressed on our political opponent something, sometimes with meanness, that there was no longer any room for people like them in our new world. This was a big mistake, for their isolation was so severe that they saw fit to express not so much their views but their anger in a man like Donald Trump, a man who made Reagan and Bush seem like archangels of virtue and integrity. Trump, to us, is so vile that from the day he was elected, we have not ceased to express our vitriol, our disdain, even our hate. We have spent the last 4 years trying to tell Trump and his supporters, "You don't belong here, you should never have come." Though this may just be a part of the political game, it has had grievous, alienating effects. Once again, our side has won with the election of Joe Biden. But if we think for a moment that this is progress, then we simply have not learnt our lesson. If we think for a moment, like we did with Clinton, like we did with Obama, that we've somehow turned a page, we are deeply mistaken and have set ourselves up for even bigger, more grievous losses in the future. We must realize that there is no such thing as genuine progress until everyone moves together in the same direction. Until then, all elections do is give expression to manifest divisions, and the left and the right, across the Western world, by the way, are growing further apart. Unity, not the victory of one side or another, is the surest mark of progress. From a neutral position, all we see is disapproval and blind self-righteous anger from both sides. As far as I've seen, the only difference between the two sides are point of worldview, not genuine virtue. A friend of mine posted on social media yesterday how disgusted she was about the recent the storming of the Capitol. And yet she was one of the first people to join the anti-Trump march in London when he came in, I think it was 2017. Don't we realize that we manifest some of the vices that we accuse the other side of having, hating their leader, their values, their way of life, their identity? That's exactly what these people in the last few days have been doing. Don't we see that a more fundamental solution must be sought and found to bring an end to the deepening madness of which we must share a part of the responsibility. If we are to call ourselves liberal, truly liberal, then we must do to ourselves what we demand of others. We must harbor no prejudices and practice no intolerance. We must see those who are different as extensions of ourselves and give value to people who everyone else tells us to hate. Liberalism is as one of its founding fathers preached, demands far more than loving our neighbors. It also demands loving our enemies. I first noticed this in Britain's Brexit campaign. What at first seemed like a straightforward victory for Remain turned a corner when the Remain narrative started to attack the character of the Leave voter. Well, I was skeptical about this, though I did not think it would actually swing the vote completely. But by the time the day for voting arrived, we had basically set up our own definition of moral goodness and right course for the future, and aggressively accused those who did not think the same way of being immoral and backward. This could never have had any other effect than to isolate many, still valuing their heritage and their traditions, to feel something like something was being imposed on them, something very powerful and overwhelming, and that voting for Leave was the only way out. In my opinion, this is exactly what happened in America in 2016. We used the Obama victory to tell our non-liberal opponents, see, there's now no more room for you. Nothing but a backlash would ensue, and our history tells us that when there is a war of attrition between the right and left, the left is the weaker. So what do we do now? Is there a way of stopping the cycle and so we can implement a program of progress generally acceptable to both sides? Yes, I think so. But to get there, we must want it first. Joe Biden himself said that we must stop seeing our political opponents as enemies. Now, he is one of the first contemporary Western leaders to see the limit of winning. I think he is very wise to have said that. And we liberals must pay attention and be warned. The perception of history as something culminating in the triumph of liberal democracy and liberal values is far from a foregone conclusion, as the work of theorists like Huntington and Fukuyama all the way to Hegel and Nietzsche argue. Liberal progress is not natural, and it often walks a tightrope. Okay? So more important in history's trajectory are things like identities and our loyalties to them. And theorists argue that as the world gets smaller, it will produce more clashes than peace. For instance, I did start by bemoaning things like Brexit and Trump, but now I have just started to see them as more natural social phenomena in the march of civilizations. I keep reminding my friends, Germans in the 1930s were among the most educated and enlightened of the world at the time. The Russian Bolsheviks were the elite of this society. Just because they have all the attributes and hallmarks of liberalism doesn't mean that people will always choose it. There are stronger forces that galvanize a human spirit, belonging, being valued, even being superior. And unless the human condition changes, we will never, ever be free from their whispers and persuasions. My friends, Biden has won. But if we are wise, then we cannot, after all that we've seen, see this as a deep, fundamental victory. For our world is not the safe place for our worldview that we thought it was. This will take something deeper and harder, something that we ourselves can change. It will be in expanding the shared ground between the left and the right, already so diminished in the last decade, and building shared understanding so that when compromises are required, they may be given freely and charitably from both sides. That's what democracy always aimed for. When they won in 2016, we were hurting. They will be hurting now. We must this time not aggravate their hurt, but attend to it. It is our obligation as liberals to be the solution that others want, rather than the authority that beats and shouts them down. In other words, my friends, now is not the time to celebrate anything, but to seek genuine, unifying, lasting solutions.